Our next speaker is the president of the Illinois Senate. He honors the City Club of Chicago by delivering his State of the State address here every year. Our next speaker presides over the largest Senate caucus in America and the largest Senate Democratic caucus in the history of Illinois. He is a graduate of Loyola University and Loyola University Law School. Our next speaker and his wife, Pam, are the proud parents of 5 beautiful children. Ladies and gentlemen, President John Cullerton. Mr. President.
Did you say 5? Wow. 5 kids. There's some shy politicians here. I'm going to introduce one of those 40. State Senator Heather Staines is here. And I normally wouldn't do the lower house, but she's my state rep, Ann Williams, State Representative Ann Williams. Jay, thanks for introducing me. Many of you know me because I'm the president of the Senate, right? But I'm not as famous as Senator Durbin or Speaker Madigan or Pat Quinn, the governor. So I would like to give a shout out to Bruce Browner for putting me in his commercials. Thank you very much for highlighting my 35 years of service in the General Assembly. But Sheila, I was going to suggest to him that if he wanted to be bipartisan, he could swap in Judy Bar-Topinka and still get to his 100 years. So let's talk about that, all right? Our guest today is the senior United States Senator from Illinois. When one mentions the name Paul Douglas and the name Paul Simon, one immediately thinks of our next speaker. He was elected to the Senate in 1996 and reelected in 2002 and in 2008. His fellow Democratic senators elected him to the post of Assistant Majority Leader, also known as Majority Whip. It is the Senate's second highest ranking position. After his speech to us last year, he paid each and every one of us in the audience the supreme compliment, and I quote, "The City Club is an amazing forum which harkens back to an era of public discourse. There is a dynamic in your gathering which the mightiest blogs cannot touch." Ladies and gentlemen, United States Senator Dick Durbin.
Thanks, John Cullerton. Thank you. It's an honor to be with you today, and it's a rare occurrence for me to be accompanied by Loretta Durbin. Glad you're here, honey. I want to acknowledge my Chicago Chief of Staff, Claudisol Duque. Where are you, Claudisol? I know you're there. She is. And since I'm doing quite well with Wise Latinas, I wanted you also to meet my campaign manager, Anna Valencia. Anna, over here. And I thank John Cullerton for loaning me Ron Holmes as my press secretary. Ron, you're somewhere here, probably videotaping. Thank you, Ron. The year was 1989. The Chicago Bulls were in a playoff for the NBA championship, and they were playing the Cleveland Cavaliers. And in the game between those two teams, Michael Jordan scored 69 points. 69. And after the game, they went up to the center on the Bulls, Stacey King, and said, "Stacey King, what was it like to be out there to watch that?" And he said, "As long as I live, no matter how many basketball games I ever play, I will never, ever forget this night when Michael Jordan and I scored 70 points." I feel the same way about an appearance before the City Club. And I don't know if the crowd that comes out here on a regular basis for speakers reflects the bon vivant style of Jay Doherty or the Chicken Vesuvio. I don't know if they're here for the insightful words of the Honorable Dr. Paul Green, PhD, or the cannoli. But whatever the reason, the crowds come out here with some frequency, and I'm glad you do. I wasn't making it up. This doesn't happen much anymore, where people of different backgrounds and different political faith come together for kind of an open forum. It's a good thing. It's a healthy thing. So this campaign is down to 4 weeks and a few days, and most of us are a little weary, but know we can see the finish line and are pushing forward. Campaign experiences in Illinois are amazing. This vast state, 400 miles roughly from one end to the other, encompasses everything from this magnificent city down to Cairo, Illinois. Don't say Cairo. Cairo, Illinois, where just outside of Cairo, people grow cotton. I ain't kidding. Paul Simon used to refer, you remember this, Sheila? He called that Southern Illinois district the land of grits and gospel music. It is a different world and a wonderful world, but it's such a sharp contrast as we find as we move around the state. And you meet some amazing people. And probably one of the most amazing people I met was a woman in Springfield, Illinois. And she came up to me and she said, "I've been waiting to meet you for 50 years. I said, "Really?" She said, "I was at St. John's College of Nursing, and my roommate was your sister. And she told me when you were just a little kid, she said, 'Watch for this Dick Durbin, my brother. This guy is going to be president someday. I can't get over this kid. He is just never met a stranger, likes to talk in public. He's going to be.'" So she said, "I remembered that. And years later, your name pops up. You're a congressman." I'm thinking, that's that same Dick Durbin. And then you get elected to the United States Senate. She said, "She may be right. He's on his way." She said, "I've been thinking about that all this time. We finally get to meet." I said, "That's terrific, but I don't have a sister." She was convinced. Let me talk to you about an issue. Let me talk to you about an issue that I think really kind of spells what's happening in Washington on one particular issue, and also what is happening within a major political party today. I want to talk about a small federal agency that's important for creating jobs. It was the agency that was used to rebuild Europe after World War II, before the Marshall Plan. And after the fall of the Berlin Wall, this small agency has helped American businesses win customers in Eastern Europe and around the world. President Reagan, who was no big fan of government bureaucracy, said of this agency, "It contributes in a significant way to U.S. exports." Today, this small agency in Washington helps American companies, large and small, compete in 180 nations around the world. This agency doesn't cost American taxpayers one dime. Not a dime. In fact, last year, this agency generated $1 billion profit, which they gave to the Treasury. It helps to reduce America's budget deficit. It reduces our trade deficit. It reduces our jobs deficit. And the Tea Party hates it like the devil hates holy water. If you haven't guessed already, it's the Export-Import Bank of the United States of America. Ex-Im Bank is America's official export credit agency. It was created by FDR during the Great Depression to help companies sell their products overseas when private banks wouldn't lend to them. We've seen since the financial crisis of 2008, private lending has contracted. Ex-Im lending has expanded, enabling U.S. companies to still reach markets overseas. Over the last 5 years, Ex-Im Bank has helped support 1.2 million jobs in America, many high-skilled, high-wage manufacturing jobs, just the kind we need. And it's returned more than $2 billion in that period of time to the U.S. Treasury. I do believe that the head of the Chicago regional office of Ex-Im Bank is here. Jan Blaho, are you here? Thank you for joining us today. Now, when I tell that story, I think most juries would vote not guilty on the charge that this is a wasteful agency. You would never know it from the debate in Washington. Incredibly, killing the Export-Import Bank has now become the Tea Party's litmus test for so-called small government conservatives. It's not their first litmus test. Their first litmus test was to repeal the Affordable Care Act. 54 straight votes in the House to repeal it. As if we didn't get the message after the 34th one, they went to 54 votes to repeal it. The Affordable Care Act, we can talk about the merits of that, but I would defer the podium to Tony Preckwinkle. Tony, who came to my office a year before that law went into effect, and said, let's ask President Obama for a waiver for Cook County so that people can start signing up for Medicaid earlier in Cook County. How many are we up to now, Tony?
92,000.
92,000 people signed up for Medicaid under that. Statewide, 650,000 people now have insurance in Illinois because of the Affordable Care Act. Of those, about 400,000 expansion of Medicaid, 250,000 the insurance exchanges. Nationwide, over 7 million uninsured people are now covered in the first year by the Affordable Care Act. Yet that continues to be a Tea Party litmus test as to whether you want to repeal it. Then they decided that was not enough. They suggested, let's default on America's national debt. That was a Tea Party proposal. They backed down at the last minute because it would have been a costly disaster, harming businesses all across the nation. And a year ago, though, they decided to show their hubris in the Senate by calling for the shutdown of our government, and they did it at great expense. One of my colleagues took to the floor and spoke for a long, long period of time, quoted from Dr. Seuss, amused us, but he ended up costing our economy and our government a massive amount of money. That was a Tea Party response to how to deal with government, and people wonder why things aren't working in Washington. None of these ideas appeal to the American public, incidentally. Now they've decided the test case will be the Export-Import Bank. In the 80 years since it was created, Congress has reauthorized Ex-Im Bank 16 times, usually without much debate. Little changes here and there. But that changed. In 2012, the Export-Import Bank came up for reauthorization, and the Tea Party decided to stop it completely. Ultimately, we were able to squeeze through a 2-year extension, but they're trying again. We want to return to Washington after the election and to reauthorize this in the hopes that we can get it done before the end of the year. Our opposition, the Heritage Foundation, the Koch brothers funded Americans for Prosperity, and a lot of groups on that end of the political spectrum. The far-right campaign to kill the Export-Import Bank is ideology run amok. It is placing Tea Party catechism over logic and good jobs for American workers. This year alone, Export-Import Bank has helped 128 Illinois companies, 21 in the city of Chicago. They've exported a total of over $1 billion worth of products around the world. So I wanted to introduce you to the owners of some of those companies. The first, we got a list from Ex-Im Bank as to companies that have been helped. So the first, I won't name the name of this company, the first company on the list was a pretty familiar name. It's a company that's pretty iconic around here. It's been owned by the same family for 3 generations. We called the company's vice president, Chicago company, and said, we understood your company got some assistance from the Ex-Im Bank. Would you mind telling us what it was and how it helped you? The man replied, we've never done a deal with the Export-Import Bank. Kind of taken aback, we went and checked the list again and said, what's this all about? Because he went on to say, not only have we never done a deal with them, I don't think they ought to exist. We called the Export-Import Bank and said, hey, what's the problem here? Are you sure you actually help these people? The answer was yes. Here's what happened. A company in Mexico wanted to buy $3 million worth of product from this Chicago company. The Mexican company applied to American banks for a loan to finance it. The American bank said, we'd like to loan you the money, but you're in Mexico. We don't know you. You may be risky. But you could get the Export-Import Bank to backstop your loan. And that's what happened. The Export-Import Bank backstopped the loan of the Mexican purchaser, and it ended up making $3 million in purchases from a Chicago company which now says it hates the Export-Import Bank. A little hard to follow. I want to tell you a couple other stories that I think illustrate this point. When it comes to the Export-Import Bank, there's a lot of confusion, a lot of disinformation. I want to try to correct some of it. First, let me tell you about a small business in Chicago that has been helped by the Export-Import Bank and actually knows it. The Howe Corporation manufactures huge ice-making machines for customers, including supermarkets and food processors. It's been in the same family for 4 generations. Mary Howe, the great-granddaughter of the founder, runs it today. When Mary purchased the business from her dad, exports made up 15% of Howe Corporation's business. Today, they account for 40%. Increased exports are the key to the company's future. Like most Ex-Im customers, Howe Corporation doesn't receive a dollar, not a dollar, in direct loans from the Export-Import Bank, but it purchases a type of insurance from the bank called Foreign Receivables Insurance. That insurance guarantees that a company will be paid for the products it sells, even if the foreign buyer fails to pay in full. Many private banks require companies to have this kind of insurance before they'll lend the money. If the Export-Import Bank is not reauthorized, as the Tea Party hopes it will not be, Howe Corporation could lose up to 40% of its sales. By the way, not only is the Howe Corporation family owned, the employees are from big families as well. The average employee at that company has been there for 23 years. Among Howe's workers are 4 brothers from one family, a father and a son from another family, and cousins from a third family. Josh De La Rosa is a customer service tech. He's been with Howe for 7 years. His dad worked for Howe for 36 years, his uncle for 43 years. Mary Howe couldn't be here today, but she sent Josh De La Rosa and Howe's treasurer, Tammy Phillips, so you could see the kind of folks in Chicago who are working today with the help of the Export-Import Bank. Tammy, Josh, stand up for us if you don't mind. Glad that you're here. Thank you. So what are the misrepresentations and distortions about Ex-Im Bank? One is the bank only makes loans. The reality is that loans to foreign buyers of American goods make only a small fraction of the bank's balance sheet. The vast majority are short-term credit insurance policies and working capital guarantees. Critics like to say, well, that Export-Import Bank, it only supports 2% of U.S. exports, only 2%. That would amount to $37 billion in sales a year. That's more than the total U.S. exports to France, Australia, India, and Africa combined. That's about as much as our top 3 agricultural exports, soybeans, wheat, and corn. And it's as much as the U.S. semiconductor and medical equipment industries combined. There's another misperception. Ex-Im is just a scheme to funnel government subsidies to a handful of big companies. The reality, more than 90% of Ex-Im's transactions benefit small and medium-sized businesses. Oh, they say Ex-Im Bank picks winners and losers. The truth, all U.S. exporters and foreign buyers can apply for assistance. If they can show a need, they can get some help. Critics charge that it distorts the free market. I'll talk about that more in a minute. In reality, the Ex-Im Bank levels the playing field for American companies. Now, you know at the top of the list is Boeing Aircraft, with their headquarters here in Chicago. They are competing against Airbus. Airbus has its own version in Europe of an Ex-Im Bank, prepared to backstop the loans necessary for those purchasers, airlines that want to purchase the airliners that are made by Airbus. Boeing's only real competitor for commercial airline sales receives far more in subsidies from its European government parents than Boeing receives from the U.S. Killing the Ex-Im Bank makes it harder to sell Boeing aircraft. How is that possibly helping the U.S. economy? And what would it mean to Illinois' economy, which has a lot of suppliers? I'm headed to Rockford this evening. People don't know the major commitment by the Rockford area in the aerospace industry and to Boeing. And this isn't a battle between liberals and conservatives. Supporters of the Ex-Im Bank include the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the National Association of Manufacturers, and the AFL-CIO. Every Democrat in the U.S. Senate backs the long-term reauthorization of the Senate. So do a lot of Republican senators. Let me credit a few. My colleague Mark Kirk, Republican, he supports reauthorizing the Ex-Im Bank. Lindsey Graham, conservative from South Carolina, he said picking on this bank makes no sense to me other than just an ideological fixation on the way the world should be versus the way that it is. I want to also highlight a man by the name of Ganayu Dada. He's another Chicagoland business owner using the Ex-Im Bank. He grew up in Nigeria, which is now the fastest growing economy in Africa. When he was in his early 20s, he had a chance to go to the Soviet Union. He's with us today. Thank you for joining us. He said he didn't want to go to the Soviet Union. He wanted to come to America. That's where businesses had a fighting chance. Came to Chicago in 1975 with $750 in his pocket, earned a business degree from UIC, a master's degree from Roosevelt. 20 years ago, he became an American citizen. Congratulations. Today, he owns a small export finance company in Naperville called Kofa International. In the Hausa language of Nigeria, Kofa means to open doors. That's why Ganayu Dada is trying to do, with the help of the Export-Import Bank, open doors between Africa and the U.S. He helps arrange financing through the Ex-Im Bank so the companies in Illinois and throughout America sell their products in Nigeria and other African nations. Among the projects his company has helped to finance with Ex-Im assistance are major water treatment plants, oil and gas drilling projects both in Lagos, Nigeria. He says he's so happy every day because he's able to use American innovation and technology to help good-paying jobs in America and in Nigeria. Mr. Dada, thank you for joining us today. Shimon Peres is an extraordinary man. He just received the Congressional Gold Medal, and it was well-deserved. This is a man in Israel who has endured so many government changes and continues to be a voice of reason, peaceful moderation, and a person I greatly admire. Got to meet him a few years back. We were in Israel. And a delegation sat down with him, and we said to him, Mr. Peres, what's the greatest threat to the United States today? He didn't hesitate. He said, China. Don't you see it? And I was kind of surprised. I thought it might be terrorism or the proliferation of nuclear weapons. China. And I thought about that, and from that point forward, whenever a foreign visitor came to my office, I always asked them the same thing. So what's going on with China in your country? Without fail, from every corner of the world, they said, well, it's interesting you should ask. China has a major presence in our country. And then I went to Ethiopia, and I sat down with their late Prime Minister Meles, and we had a half-an-hour meeting from 11:30 to 12. And at 2 minutes to 12, I thought, damn, I didn't ask the China question. So at 2 minutes to 12, I said, excuse me before I leave, but what is the presence of China in Ethiopia today? We stayed for another half an hour. And he said to me, you don't get it in America. You don't understand this in America. He said, do you realize what China is doing on the continent of Africa? If we want to build a $100 million stadium in Addis Ababa, the Chinese say, here's $100 million, pay us back $70 million. Concessional loans, pretty appealing. One or two conditions: Chinese architects, Chinese engineers, Chinese contractors, and at least half the workforce Chinese, and they're never going to leave. They have insinuated themselves into the continent of Africa. Why would they pick Africa? Because if you look at the 10 fastest growing economies in the world today, 6 of them are in Africa. In the next 10 years, 8 of them will be in Africa. So when we talk about our role in this shrinking world and our role in increasing good-paying jobs in Illinois and Chicago and America, we've got to be talking about things as basic as the Ex-Im Bank. I don't get the Tea Party. I understand conservative Republicans. I've worked with them. I've lived with them. I've come up with legislation together with them. We can do things together. But this Tea Party strain is off on a separate tangent. And while we've got an election coming up, let me tell you that my opponent is proud to be part of it. And he has said that he hopes the Tea Party takes over the Illinois Republican Party. And as a tribute to the Tea Party, his major fundraiser tonight will feature the Tea Party patriarch, Herman Cain, who is coming in on his behalf. So when it comes to choices in elections, I think you're going to have one. Let me open it to any questions that you might have. Dr. Green, front and center.
First, let me give you a hearty lobus. All right. If you don't know what that means, marry a Lithuanian girl. Okay. Billy, this is not a democracy. You write your question out and hand it in. Changing the rules. Sorry, Senator. I just wanted to be like Speaker Boehner. All right, here we go. From the unemployed John Gates. When will Congress pass a new highway transportation infrastructure bill? How big will it be? What will it include? How will it be funded? Pick any one you like.
21 years ago, we imposed the federal fuel tax, 18 cents on a gallon of gas, 24 cents on a gallon of diesel fuel. In the period of time over the last 21 years, the buying power of that highway trust fund has been reduced by almost 40%. Why? Because we're driving more fuel-efficient cars and trucks. We're burning fewer gallons. But the needs are still out there. In fact, they're growing because of our lack of investment in infrastructure. 75%, I think it's roughly 75% of all the dollars spent in Illinois on highway construction come from Washington through the federal government. And they come primarily from this highway trust fund. What we had tried to do every 5 years when we reauthorized the Federal Highway Trust Fund is to make up the difference, the shortfall in revenue from the highway gas taxes with general revenue. Now it's a battle royal. And once again, there's some breakdown here between the House and the Senate. That is one of the major parts of the problem. The second part of the problem is totally political. And for those of you who are in politics, you're going to understand this one in a heartbeat. There was a time when the Public Works Committee of the House of Representatives was the largest single committee in the House. Why? Why would 125 members of the House want to serve on one committee? I'll tell you why. Because every 5 years there was a highway bill. And every 5 years, the members of that committee got to designate highways and projects in their districts. They would announce them. They'd be out there with a shovel, turning the dirt. They'd be the first in line to cut the ribbon and the first in line to put it on the top of their brochure that they delivered Lower Wacker Drive, which incidentally was a federal earmark that Senator Obama and I put together. That's why it was the easiest bill to pass on Capitol Hill. Everybody, Democrat, Republican alike, got it, went back home and talked about it, and it had a bipartisan support. And then someone, some group I should say, decided to abuse this process on earmarks. They did some awful things. And a couple people went to jail for it, and in a movement toward reform, we eliminated earmarks. Now, what used to be the easiest bill in the world to pass has no earmarks in it, no personal interest of any member of Congress or Senate. It's become a topic for debate as to whether or not, and the Tea Party position, I hate to keep picking on them, they deserve it. The Tea Party position is there should not be a federal infrastructure program. Do they remember Dwight David Eisenhower, for God's sake, and the interstate highway system? You know, when it comes right down to it, that interstate highway system created the economy of America today. We're built around it, and we covet it, and we want it to grow, and it's a federally inspired project. But they are trying at this point, John, as you well know, to basically stop federal funding. The first thing they tried to do was eliminate a special favor put in the bill by none other than Dan Rostenkowski. Rostenkowski led the fight to make sure that 20% of the Federal Highway Trust Fund went to mass transit. Think about mass transit, my friends. What would Chicago be without it? Whether you're talking about Metra, RTA, CTA, PACE, all of these elements are receiving federal assistance from the Federal Highway Trust Fund, and I think they should. They're keeping people off the roads. They're reducing congestion, reducing highway usage. It's a perfectly logical argument. It was the first target of the Tea Party to take out of the bill. So, John, I don't know the answer. We put it off until May of next year, when we'll address it again. The election will decide who's going to sit down at the table to address it. I'm committed to this infrastructure. There isn't a single thing that Congress can do that has more dramatic positive impact on the growth of the economy, whether it's O'Hare modernization, whether it's the CREATE project for railroads, whether it's the highway systems that we've got to maintain and improve. And I think this current debate is going to be as damaging, if not more so, to the economy than even the debate on exports.
Trying to make the answers a little more,
A little longer?
a little sooner.
Make the question shorter.
Only people happy are people on C-SPAN. Okay, here we go.
That's a lot of people.
All right, we have Bill Marovitz. I didn't see you there, Bill. Former state senator and 9th Congressional District committeeman. Oh, this is another short question. Please update us on the ISIS situation.
In 60 words or less. Gosh, there's no short answer to this. And I'll try to be as brief as I can about this. We had a vote 12 years ago to invade Iraq, and I voted against it. I thought it was a mistake. I didn't think they'd made the case of weapons of mass destruction. And of course, we went forward with that invasion and the invasion of Afghanistan, which I supported. We were going after those responsible for 9/11. They seem to be two distinct missions. I don't think anyone who voted for or against either one would imagine they were voting for an 8-year war in Iraq and the longest war in American history in Afghanistan. What happened? Well, it turned out that the very best military in the world, the very best fighting men and women in the world, put into this Middle Eastern maelstrom, ended up finding our advances stopped by crude roadside bombs and tactics of terrorists who didn't care if they lost their own lives. And it was a lesson to us, I hope, that when it comes to the Middle East, we need to be thoughtful and careful. Yes, We have the best technology in the world. Yes, we have the best men and women in the world. But there are some things we just can't take on and solve on a military basis. No matter how many troops we send into Iraq or Syria, we can't establish the kind of leadership in either of those countries that embraces the diversity of their national boundaries. No matter how many troops we send in, we can't create a situation where someone stands up and says, I'm an Iraqi, before they say I'm a Sunni or a Shia. And we can't end with our military a 14th century battle within Islam. So what the president has said, and I think rightfully, ISIS is a real threat, not just to Syria and Iraq, but beyond. What he's done, he's criticized for it, but I think he did the right thing. He said we need to start with an international coalition, front and center first, Arab and Muslim nations. If you are willing to fight for stability of your own region of the world, we will help you, but you have to step up, and they did. More should. I hope we can encourage them to. Then our NATO allies joined in too. It is an easier battle to define in Iraq because there's actually an Iraqi army of 900,000 that we can train, support, provide air support, logistics, intelligence. Syria, 1,500 different militia that are fighting in Syria, some of them neighborhood militia. We think we have a good bet with the Free Syrian Army. Only time will tell. So it is a long-term commitment. It is led by a coalition that is diverse enough that I think it has credibility. And I think the president's right. Putting a standing army in those countries today from the United States is just not acceptable.
We have a couple of questions on your issue of the college debt. Not that I would be interested in that, or the DePaul University would be interested in that, but just for the rest of the people, how is that going to go along refinancing college debt?
Elizabeth Warren came up with the bill, and I co-sponsored it. And here's what it says. If you have existing use undergraduate, it applies to graduate and plus loans too. If you have existing undergraduate debt from your education, assuming you're now out of school, if you are current on your payments, you can reduce the interest rate paid to 3.8%. Now, many of the students that I run into with the ordinary subsidized loans as well as private loans have interest rates far in excess of that, 8, 9, and 10%. And sadly, many of the private loans have no flexibility for consolidating loans, for limiting the amount that you have to pay out of your take-home pay, for forgiveness if you take on certain public service careers. So with Elizabeth Warren's bill, which I'm co-sponsoring, we would be changing kind of the contours of debt, bringing the interest rate down. All of us who've had mortgages know what that means. It means more money is spent to retire the principal. It's going to be retired sooner, and it could be a more affordable payment. You may have seen this ad that I'm paying a few bucks to put on TV. These kids are just loaded with debt. And some of them, you just shake your head and think, how in the world are they ever going to get out from under this thing? So that's the nature of the bill. We need 60 votes to get it out of the Senate. We had 3 Republicans who supported us: Collins of Maine, Corker of Tennessee, Murkowski of Alaska. We needed 2 more Republicans. We couldn't get them. But I think this issue is going to come back. The bottom line, I might say, is not just refinancing of college loans, a debt not dischargeable in bankruptcy, but it also is taking a hard look at the cost of higher education. Higher education is pricing itself out of the business. I know the city colleges now have an initiative to reduce the cost for students who are good students who come to city colleges. University of Chicago has just announced a new initiative. This is thoughtful, and I think it's the only way to keep kids moving in the right direction toward a valuable college education, but not putting them into this terrible mess of debt which could literally compromise their lives.
Is that a legitimate question?
Oh, sure, if you want to.
Okay, well, occasionally we have a sandbagger here who will, to close, our professional sandbagger. Thank you, Senator Durbin, thank you for being visible and vocal champion of Future Gen over the years. What is the plan to allow Future Gen to compete? Well, you answer the question.
It was 10 or 11 years ago. George Bush was president, and he announced a national competition. And it was over a project called Future Gen. And here was the idea. We would take coal-fired electrical power plants, capture the emissions that otherwise went through the smokestack, pipe them, and sink them underground, and capture the emissions so they didn't go into the atmosphere. So it was a national competition. And in the end, there were two finalists, Illinois and Texas. I thought, we don't have a chance here. And lo and behold, the panel of professionals said it's Illinois. Well, that's pretty darn good. And so I was pretty happy. It was $1 billion federal energy research project, and we won. 2 weeks later, Secretary Bodman of the Department of Energy, whose family incidentally owns Vienna beef hot dogs, Secretary Bodman came to me and said, we thought this over, we're canceling the project. I said, what? We just won it after years of competing. No, we don't think it makes sense anymore. I was a little upset. I didn't want to intimidate or bully him, but I was a little upset. And so I said, we're going to hang on to this. George W. Bush is on his way out. Somebody new is coming in. If it's a fellow named Obama, I know he supports this. And I think even McCain will support it, and he did. And so we waited. President Obama came in, part of stimulus. They put the project back on the books. The project is under construction now. It's $1 billion project. It sinks, it goes to an old power plant in Meredosia. It uses a new oxygenating technique to reduce emissions, and it captures what's coming out, what would otherwise come out of the smokestack, and sinks it 1.25 miles underground, under 3 levels of shale. What they're sinking down there is CO2. It's not explosive, it's not flammable. Down there, it can be safely stored. If it works, and we think it will, it's supported 20% of the investment by private companies, coal companies, utility companies. If it works, it will mean 90% cleanup on coal-fired power plants. That's a little different, isn't it? And it will mean reducing the emissions going into the atmosphere. I think we've got to look at that option. There's so much energy in coal. If we can find a way to do this in an environmentally responsible way, and unlike my opponent, I'm not a climate denier. I think we've got a challenge here. If we can do it in an environmentally responsible way, we can use this energy resource.
Pretty good answer. Boy, I thought I was giving him a. You were ready for that one. By the way, that was Hoyt. I can't read the last name, but Hoyt. I hope you like that answer. That was pretty good. Well, we have. Wait a minute. Now I'm going to add another question for that line. We did that. College did. All right. We have one question here, not signed. Now, if you don't sign your name, even a fictitious name, do something. Mark Wormos, raise your hand. There you are. This is on film. Oberweis is going to see this. Here we go. He gets his question read by adding that.
Yes.
Friend of Paul Green. Here we go. Would you support a federal bailout of the failing Illinois pension system? Hey, it's a sandbag question, but this is a city club, an open forum, and you got a fairly conservative Republican out there.
No. We can't do it. This isn't the only pension system struggling in our state. There are a lot of pension systems at the local level struggling as well. And we got our hands full. We've reduced the deficit by 2/3 over the last 5 or 6 years. And we have a good trend line in terms of a slow rate of growth increasing in healthcare cost. That 60% of our deficit is driven by healthcare cost. Now we're seeing that curve, as President Preckwinkle and I heard the president describe yesterday at Northwestern, that curve is starting to flatten a little, and it's buying longer solvency for Medicare and other systems. So we're starting to get into the right mode. We've reduced over the next 10 years $2.5 trillion of deficit. We've got more to go to hit the Simpson-Bowles Commission target. Let me just give you a little insight. You should have John Cullerton up here on the subject because he has to live with it down at the Illinois State Senate. I started working in the Illinois State Senate fresh out of law school. One of the first speeches I can remember on the floor of the Senate was someone with the Pension Laws Commission who stood up and said, well, we got a handful of bills that do this, that, and the other thing. It's a shame we won't be able to fully fund the pension system this year. We'll get to it next year. And that's what happened over and over and over again. What kept it basically moving forward was the presumption of return on investment, which was destroyed in the last recession. And that happened across the United States, and it certainly hit us hard. Complicating it is a provision in the Illinois Constitution, which has been ruled on by the court, to protect the right of pensioners to those promises made. In fairness to the pensioners, they kept their end of the bargain. They were asked to pay so much out of their wages during the course of their working years. And now, the other part of it was to be supplied by the government, and we're not in a position to do it. I think there are some options, but they will not involve federal financing, which we'll see if we can move them forward. But I hope you'll invite John Cullerton and others up here to talk about this in more detail. I'm not passing the buck, but it's a state issue, and I think I was pretty direct in my answer that I don't think the federal government is going to be solving this problem.